How's it going, Joe? It's great to finally get you on the podcast. I feel like we've been trying to get this thing scheduled for quite some time now, but with our schedules being so hectic, I'm glad that we can finally get on.
I think you and I spent a lot of time at the hairdresser, I think, and so getting our appointments all lined up with our podcasting, that was probably the difficulty here.
Yeah, yeah. This head of hair, it doesn't maintain itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Joe, why don't we start with, your background, right? How you got into IT, how you got into, kind of the security side. What made you want to go down this route? Was there, something that you maybe discovered earlier on in your life that, kind of took you down this path when you're looking back on it, or what was that like?
My story's a little different than probably a lot of your guests because my first job out of school was actually the soft drink business, and I was working for Coca-Cola in marketing, and I had a lot of fun in soft drinks, commercials and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I remember at the end of one year, we had a great year, and we rose 6%, and I was like, maybe I'll get in a different industry that grows a little faster than beverages. And I was always interested in tech. And this was the mid-90s, and tech wasn't big back then. I mean, to think about it, there was no social media, there was very little internet. Very few people had email addresses when I first got into tech. I'll just tell you a funny story about myself. My first email address was Joe and Karash, which is my wife's name, at AOL.com. And at the time, we thought, well, every family will just have one email address, like you have one physical address. And so we had a shared email address. So that's how far back I go in tech. But then I got interested in security in the early 2000s. It was an emerging space, an exciting space. And I was the CEO of a company called eSecurity, which was the first SIM product way back in the day. And what really sort of turned me on to security was when I worked at iDefense. And at iDefense, we worked doing threat intel, and our customers were all the three-letter agencies in the government, all the largest banks in the world. And at the time, I also got a security clearance. And so when you get connected to the three-letter agencies, and you're looking at all of the things that are happening in cybersecurity, it can't help but be exciting. And, iDefense was a lot of fun because we had white hat hackers. We were also, tearing up software around the globe with our white hat team, just sort of trying to get ahead of the bad guys. So it was a lot of fun back then, and I, stayed interested in security ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting working with the government. Earlier on in my career, I worked for a very small company that did, enhanced 911 software. And so the government was a huge, consumer of our product. And I finagled my way into leading the entire tech side for our government clients. And I mean, it really does just like open up, your mind into what's possible, right? And I feel like it's a different way from government employees, because the government employees are typically very siloed, and as a contractor, you can come in and say, no, I need to know what's going on over here. I know you normally don't tell people, but this impacts my work of how I provide this product. And so I need to know these different pieces. And so you learn probably way more than what you should actually learn in some cases, and it's always interesting because, I was going to a facility for maybe a year or two, and I never knew what they did. I mean, you're in the middle of the mountains, West Virginia, nothing else is around. Like a town was built around this thing to, support contractors coming in, right? And I have no clue what we're doing, and one day, I guess my handler, that's what I called him, my handler at the facility, he's like, Joe, do you not know what we do here? I said, I have no clue. I literally have no clue. he's and he like pointed to these satellites that were, these giant satellites on premise, and told me like one of the small things that they did, and I'm like, my God, where am I?
Well, Joe, and there's a couple of great points to kind of for first. So I will say my area of expertise now in cyber is around insider threat and insider risk. And so you just identified a couple of things around, why it's so important, because to your point, like contractors in particular do get a lot of knowledge around things. And so contractors are one of the biggest risks on the federal side. But the other side, I think, is just as important to touch on. And I often have to talk to the young people on my teams about this. And that is that the United States government is, in my opinion, the best in the world in cyber. I mean, the best in the world. And what's interesting about that is that when most people think of government employees, they think of people that, work at agencies and are, stereotypical, oh, these government employees, they don't work that hard, they just shuffle along. It takes a long time to get the government to do anything. You hear all these stories, etc. But what I learned in working with our intel community, our law enforcement community around cyber, is that we literally have the best people in the world at the NSA in particular, at the FBI, a little bit at the CIA, in the military. We have the best people in the world at cyber. We are nobody is better than us, and that level of understanding and respect is really important for all of us that work in the cyber community. And so I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that I think we can be really proud of, and it's something honestly that's kept us very safe as a country.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you bring that up, because sometimes as from the outsider perspective, right? And I'm talking about people that aren't even in cybersecurity. It looks like to them that, we're so far behind everyone else that we're, not capable. There's too much bureaucracy. And I will say this, there probably is too much bureaucracy, right? But at the same time, I know the crowd of security professionals, and we need those rules, because if we don't have those rules and you just say, you point us towards China and you're like, hey, you've got the power grid, go have fun, right? Like, yeah, it's going down and they won't be able to recover from it. But like, that's something, you want to really tie into other things and really control, right? And it's fascinating that you bring up, that we have that talent pool there, because I actually had on someone maybe 2 years ago at this point, and the episode was never released because the military asked me to not release it. And, I do not want the United States government showing up at my door for any reason. and he talked about how the training that he was going through was a 2-year program for, one of the 3-letter agencies. It was a 2-year program. And he said, literally every single day at any point in time, you can be cut. If you write an inefficient line of code, if you, do something that you shouldn't have done, if you put it in the wrong language, whatever it might be, you can be cut right there. That's the standards. And he said, only a very small amount of people actually make it through. And you typically have like a 6 to 12-month ramp up time before you even go to this school. And, those standards, they come into play in the real world, because now what the bar is. You kind of know what you're expected to do and what you're able to perform at and whatnot. And that's expected of you, day in and day out. And I feel like I've always felt like we've had the best cyber capabilities for sure. And if you just look at the things that have leaked, those like Eternal Blue, and how many 0 days came out of Eternal Blue, right? And that's 10 years ago at this point.
Well, it's just interesting. So, first of all, I will tell you that in working with the NSA, I interacted as much with lawyers at the NSA as with the cyber experts. That's how careful they are at following our laws. And so, they're not They're not doing things that are illegal. They're very, very, very careful about it. So, that's something that they care most about. But you mentioned there's not enough data sharing and stuff like that. I mean, all the leaks we had in the US have really been because post 9/11, the cyber community, created tools to share broadly the intelligence. And there's over 1 million people that have security clearances that have access to some of our nation's most, sensitive information. And the Jack Texera, leak recently is because it just takes one of those people to use that information the wrong way out of 1 million people. That's going to happen every once in a while. So the price that we're paying right now on those leaks is that we give a lot of access to people, and because we want to share that data, and one bad thing in a chain can cause that chain to break. So it is an interesting balance. I know there's a big back and forth in the intelligence community about that at all times. But honestly, I only wanted, we don't need to dwell on it. I just wanted to point out to your listeners that, like, hey, if you're young and you're like not sure about these things, you haven't see it, just know that the people that are protecting us from a cyber standpoint are some of the best in the world, and that's good to know, and it's also important to respect.
Yeah, absolutely. To dive into the insider threat a little bit more, right? Do you think that the Snowden leaks kind of set the stage for all the other leaks to follow, right? How big was that? How meaningful was that from a quasi insider expert knowledge, right? Like, you probably have a little bit more knowledge on that leak than anyone else, right? Like, what was that like?
I mean, that was a devastating leak. I mean, that was a devastating leak for the United States, and some people lost their lives over that leak because there was so much information that ended up in hands that it shouldn't have ended up in. And I think it was also devastating for Booz Allen and their reputation, because he was a Booz Allen contractor, and it was so very basic. I mean, all thumb drives were supposed to have been, all external drives were supposed to have been blocked, and they just hadn't gotten to that facility in Hawaii to put those controls in place. And so it was easily preventable. If people had followed policy, it would have been preventable. So it was careful. But on another level, look, here's the thing about insider threat and insider leaks. We're always going to have them. And so you have to really put controls in place. But, back to this conversation about sharing data, you've got to balance that with the need to share and collaborate. And if we step outside of the government for just a second, we go into corporate, which probably most of your listeners are corporate. I think what surprises people is how pervasive data is leaking out of organizations today. So we all might say, oh, Snowden stuff, all that. How could the government be so stupid? Or how could Booz Allen be so stupid? And let that happen? And Look in your own backyard. I mean, when our company, which specializes in helping organizations on insider threats, when we first come in, what surprises our clients is that the amount of data moving out of the organization is incredible. Literally every single person that leaves your organization for a new job takes a lot of critical data. Literally every single one. 60% of people admit they took data from their last job and are using it in their current job. That's the people that admit it. So you can imagine it's probably more like 90%. And so it's really, what's interesting right now is that the whole advent of AI and the data sets around AI, people are finally starting to pay attention and say, oh, wait a minute, do I need to be worried about my source code leaving, or my large data sets leaving, or what about your customer list, or et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing a real resurgence in people because of the focus on AI data sets. But to be fair, that's just a very small tip of the iceberg of what's actually leaving. In most organizations, we see a lot of source code, customer lists, HR data. We see that all the time. So it is an area I'm glad is finally getting some attention. And we can talk about sort of different stories around that and how it's happening and why. But on the corporate side, just to touch on on the Stone side, on the corporate side, the breach that really sort of woke everybody up in the last few years is Anthony Lewandowski, who took data from Waymo, which is all their self-driving car data. And just like Snowden took just a trove of information, Lewandowski, in the last week of his time at Google, or at Waymo, owned by Google, took all that data and he just took it on an external hard drive and then used it for a year before they realized it. And they only realized it because one of the suppliers accidentally faxed Waymo and said, hey, we need confirmation on this part. And the people at Waymo was like, wait, that's our part. So we didn't order this. And it turns out he just literally taking the exact schematic for his new company and was getting that part. And so, it was only discovered accidentally by the folks at Google. Not now was sort of that's the Snowden case on the corporate side. And he ended up, that story is interesting in the end for your listeners, is he went to prison for that and was serving time in jail when in the last days of his presidency, President Trump pardoned Anthony Lewandowski with little to no explanation at this point. So interesting sort of story that kind of keeps going.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I don't think I knew about that. Is Waymo still around after that?
Yeah, Waymo's still around. It was a massive issue between Waymo and then Uber, because it looks as though Uber basically encouraged Lewandowski to take that data, stand up his own company, and then Uber bought that company 6 months later. And so Anthony Lewandowski was at Uber when they discovered this, and Uber was working on all the self-driving car stuff. So it was a long lawsuit. They ended up settling in the end, but when after they settled the lawsuit, then the criminal trial came. And so it was a big deal. Some people think it's one of the reasons Travis lost his job. It was sort of all around the same time, and sort of it was very controversial at the time.
And that's really fascinating because like how does that even come about, right? Like you're working for Google on this project. A direct competitor, like they must have approached him at some point during his tenure at Google to approach him with this idea. Maybe I'm just not in the insider threat space, right? But I mean, that's a kind of corporate espionage that I never would have thought of. I never would have imagined that a competitor would go to that length. I could see them, buying the company, right? But for the idea to come into place with this guy to take the code, form a company, start, probably development with it, try and order the parts that were proprietary, for what he was using at Google. I mean, that's just a different level of it, I feel.
It happens every day. I mean, we had a new client just a couple of weeks ago at Code42, where they had an employee had left and stood up his own company using his source code. The way it happens is people that are smart and people that create new things are working for companies. They a lot of them believe, well, I created this design, so I'm going to take it with me to my next job. And that's not the way intellectual property works. When you work for a company, when you join, you sign a document that says anything I create for this company, the company owns. And so we see this every day with source code right now. Most software developers today have their own GitHub or GitLab accounts, like repos. If you talk to a developer friend, hey, do you have your own repo? Oh yeah, I got. What do you have in your repo? Oh, I've got projects I've been working on my whole career. Okay, were those projects for companies? Well, yeah. Does the company source code? Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not like I took it. I left the copy. The company's using that copy, but I took the copy of the source code with me, and we see that time and time again, and it's interesting. And this ties back to the AI stuff I was talking about. So the way most developers take source code is kind of interesting and very straightforward. Is they essentially, every day when a developer pulls their code down from the corporate repo, that corporate repo is locked up tight. It's, you gotta have the right certificate on your machine to get into it. Sometimes it's called like backer authentication, but like you're not getting into that repo unless you're an authorized developer, right? Most companies are really good at that now. And so once the developer takes the code down to their local machine, that's when they start writing code. They got their test cases running. They got a bunch of VMs, etc. They write their code, and then they check it back into the corporate repo. Well, in order to check it back in, you use Git commands to push that code. It's called a Git push. You push that code back up into the repo. But what a lot of developers do is at the same time, they'll do a Git push to their own personal repo. And, if they're sitting at home and they're off the corporate network, which most developers are these days, or they're Starbucks or wherever they are, most organizations are completely blind to that Git push to the corporate, to the personal repo. And we built technology Code42 so we could see that. And once we did that, we started seeing so much source code exfiltration. We were literally like, oh my gosh, we didn't even know that this was happening. At the same time, the same capability also sees when you move large data sets, you also use the Git commands to move large data sets. So we also started seeing large data sets getting moved around, and that's where the AI stuff comes into play, where people are moving large data sets to train LLMs for AI usage, and you're going to see that in the same capability. We're the only company that has this capability out there today. We launched it about 2 years ago. And so the timing was just lucky. We weren't anticipating that was going to happen with AI and the large language models coming out, which I have a lot of NVIDIA stuff a few years ago. But again, we see this kind of huge movement again. So back to the Anthony Lewandowski story, like, yes, he took his designs. Yes, he took his files. Yes, he took all stuff. I mean, he went to prison for this, so he's obviously had to pay the price. But in his mind, he probably was like, well, this is stuff I invented. This is my stuff. Like, I do this. But what he forgets is like, there's a whole team of people who worked on this. And the damage done to the people you leave behind as an insider when you take everybody's, the work that everybody did and then you go take it somewhere else is real. And, part of what we often do as an insider risk company is we help educate the organization on like, hey, what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do? Why does it matter? Why is it important? Is it the company being mean, asking you your information behind? But people often don't sort of understand that the impact that they have is on their old peers is where the biggest impact occurs on insider risk.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like it's a miss in the brain or something like that, because from my perspective, I'm in IT, right? I work a day job in cybersecurity. There's a lot of potentially, proprietary information that I have taken down in notes in my OneNote. But there's a lot of things that I'll learn, right, for the very first time, and I'll take note of it, and it'll be, not proprietary information, right? It's a configuration in AWS or whatever it might be. And I'll take note of it so that I remember it. And when I leave the company, if I don't know it by heart, I'll just take that little piece of information and put it into my personal OneNote, right? but it's not proprietary. It's not anything that's, custom to the company or anything like that. And for me to do the mental gymnastics, right, to kind of rationalize taking proprietary information from company, I mean, I don't want to go to prison, right? Like, that's
Well,
the thing. Like,
and it doesn't usually end up in prison. I think part of what's going on right here is that most organizations today have some form of data protection, but our ability to exfiltrate data from our company is expanded so rapidly in the last 5 or 6 years that people just don't think anyone's paying attention, or they don't think they're going to get caught, and it is probably more the former than the latter, because if they really think about getting caught, then they feel guilty about it, and often they won't do it, which is good. But most companies today just can't see if you upload a document to Dropbox from your house. You're not on the company network, or you just Gmail it to yourself. These are the most common ways that people take data, and they're preached. And most people are like, well, no, I don't think my company sees that. I can still print and all that kind of stuff. And so, our our philosophy as a company is, we coined a term called secure the collaboration culture. And the collaboration culture is how we all live today. We use Slack, we use Teams, we use T Drive and OneDrive. We have all these tools like Salesforce that they're cloud-based, allow us to share information, and our workflows are shared, and we can collaborate on presentations together. And that's awesome. Like, it makes us so much more productive as organizations, right? And so the key in security is not to get in the way of that, and to just wrap a little bit of security around it so that people don't feel like, hey, nobody's watching, nobody cares. And you'll find it interesting. One of the ways that we do that, that's had just a big impact, is if somebody, good employee, normal employee, been working, in their job, does something that they're not supposed to do, they'll send the system will automatically send them a video that says, hey, we noticed that you uploaded a file to Dropbox. We don't use Dropbox as our sharing platform here at X company. Please let us know. And what that does is it puts the employee on notice, like, oh, somebody's actually paying attention. But it does it in a very nice, polite way, etc. And if you let people know that we're watching the score, most people aren't going to steal from you. And most people behave the right way. And I'll tell you, last week I was doing a presentation in San Francisco, and I got there with my laptop at the conference, and they were like, oh, you can't use your laptop. And I was like, but instead I could, okay, fine, I'll use yours. And they're like, we need your presentation. And the only way I could get it to them was a thumb drive. So I plugged my thumb drive in, and I had to use an adapter, because of course Mac doesn't allow for that, right? And I gave the presentation to them, and I had 1 minute before my kickoff, so it was like fast. I got it done. I did my presentation. That afternoon, I in my inbox, I got an email, or actually it was a Slack, from my security team, a little video attached, and said, you don't use thumb drives here, Code42 that's a risky way to exfiltrate data. Please watch this video. I had to watch the video all the way through, to the very end, and check that I had watched the video and all that kind of stuff. So that's how controls in place working, and reminding you, like, don't do that. And just by doing that now, I know that if I were to leave the company, like, if I moved a bunch of data, they would notice, and they would pay attention. So that kind of control, that really reinforces a way to keep people from actually doing something.
So, I mean, that's a great like reinforcement of a learned behavior, right? But how do you stop that developer from uploading to their own personal, Git repository? Right, because I actually don't know.
Yeah. Well, from a technical standpoint, you don't want to try to stop that. And hear me out on this. If you get in the way of a software developer as a security person, which one of you is going to lose their job? And I'm telling this to security.
Yeah.
You do not want to get in the way of the 300 software developers you have at your company, or 500 or 1,000 or whatever. And that's twofold. You don't want to slow down their machine. If you slow down their developer's machine, hell is going to pay, right? The CTO is going to go to the CEO and say, whatever. And also, you don't want to get in the way of them using Git commands, because that's how they do their job every day. So that's why the approach we've taken is not to stop that, but it's to monitor that and to course correct behavior. So the first time a developer moves something to a open source project that's unsanctioned, which is also how we see that a lot too, which is, hey, we're contributing to 17 open source projects, but it turns out that when we actually start monitoring, we see code moving to about 100 open source projects. It's a very regular thing that we see at Code42 when we work with our clients. The first thing you do is you send that video to say, hey, don't do that. And then the second time the developer does it, then you have a conversation. And if it happens again, then you go to their boss and say, hey, I'm not a developer that's doing X, Y, and Z. But what you don't do is overreact and say, fire that developer, shut down their machine, cut off all software development people from pushing code around with Git commands. That's exactly the wrong response for a security team to have. And I think that's one of the big differences between insider threat and external threat. Because when you have a piece of malware come in, the first thing that you do is it's killed with a sledgehammer. You're going to isolate that machine. You're going to disconnect it. You're going to quarantine it. That is not what you do with insider threat, because you really want to investigate and understand, what is the person doing? Why are they using Dropbox? Why did Joe use a thumb drive? And it turns out Joe used a thumb drive because he was giving a presentation and he had to in order to get it done, even though it's against our policy to use a thumb drive. We understand why we made that decision in that situation, and we didn't come out and hit Joe with a sledgehammer, right? Because it's always a bad actor when malware gets in. It's always a colleague when we're talking about insider threat. The threat is fast moving and propagating when it's from the outside, but insider risk doesn't spread. Just because you, Joe, moves some files around doesn't mean some other Joe is going to move some files around. That's not how it works. You have time to investigate and to understand what's happening, right? When it's malware, the security team can handle it on its own every time. But when it's an insider, you're going to need HR, you might need legal, you're going to need a little bit of help to do that. So these are very different situations. It's never accidental when you get malware in. It's always, it's sometimes accidental in fact, because about 50% of the time, an insider risk event, this was just an accident, right? You never need to educate the hackers, the bad guys. Like, that's a waste of your time and money. Well, you always want to educate your own employees, because that brings down the number of events for you last time. And then lastly, I think the interesting one is you can get fired for not reacting fast enough to a malware threat in your environment. But with insider risk, you can get fired for reacting too fast. And so it's exactly the opposite side. So one of the things that we always work with our clients on, if you're in security, you really need to process this, is that the folks that are running CrowdStrike and looking at all the the external activities are not necessarily the same people that you want to have running your internal. Because they can be, but you have to turn your brain around and understand which problem that you're working on, external or internal, because your responses and the way you handle them are so very, very different.
Yeah, that's a really good point that, I was going to bring up. It sounds like you almost need two separate teams, because, to that normal security team, right? Everything looks like a nail when you're used to being the sledgehammer. I mean, I'll tell you right now, if I saw something like, insider threat or whatever, I would have immediately, without question, quarantined the machine, started doing a forensics investigation into the guy, or whoever it is, right? Like I would immediately, go the nuclear route. It's like, okay, we're gonna make sure this person like can't do anything.
Unfortunately, that's an exact story from my customer base. Where one of my customers, CISOs, called me and said, "Joe, I'm really angry with you. Your team handed my team a gun and didn't teach them how to use it." And because the very first big incident they had was with the senior vice president at this organization, and the security team did exactly what you described. They quarantined the machine, they took away the machine, and then they interrogated the senior vice president. And it was hugely embarrassing for that executive. But it turns out that executive was just actually doing their job. And there was a little bit of a misunderstanding about, well, I'm supposed to be sending information to that particular vendor in this case, and the security team, oh, that's an untrusted vendor. And, had they handled it the right way, it would have just said, "Oh, great, we've learned from that. We'll add that to our trusted list or whatever." But they quarantined the machine, they isolated it, and then they interrogated a person. And so, yeah, that happens. And so part of what we've learned is like, ooh, when we go in with our customers, we have to have a lot of conversations. And the funny thing is most of our customers, and security folks, like you've worked with them all year. Most of them are like, we got this, we understand it, we know, you don't have to tell us, we're very familiar with all this stuff. I'm like, no, we have to tell you. You have to listen just a little bit with us because your methodology is so different. So many people in security would like to, they much rather say, why don't we just block all this, exfiltration. And if you just block it, then, we don't have to worry about it. And it doesn't really work with insider threat. It doesn't really work. First of all, it's like, well, so you're going to block external Gmail? Yeah, it'll block Gmail. Okay, great. So how are your employees going to, I think you have to carry a second machine around with them and they have to do a dog differently. How will that go over the employees? Well, tough to them. We don't care. Okay, well, let's see if that plays out well. And it turns out your employees are still, okay, fine, but you Yahoo Mail, or we'll go to Proton Mail, they start, going around here. And so water always finds a way. And so what we tell our customers is like, look, your employees, in most of the organizations we work, your employees are going to have a Gmail account. They might have a Dropbox account because they do something with their church or their school soccer team with that or something like that. The important thing is that you help them identify, is that you watch for important company data not moving to those things. And then you course correct them if you see those things happening. And you always have the information available to you that you can, if necessary, prosecute them or whatever. But usually what you just need to do is course correct them and let them operate the way they need to operate and collaborate and work together. You cannot get in the way. Because if you start putting all these rules on people's machines, it slows down the machines for everybody. And so it tends not to be a great way to do things.
Yeah, it reminds me of a time a little bit earlier on in my career where, my manager was walking me through like our data loss prevention solution that we had, and he was saying how, nothing is going to leave that we don't know about or anything like that. And that, it's perfectly locked down and everything like that, and my security mind, I immediately, and I did this subconsciously, right? I didn't even realize that I did this at the time. I took it as a challenge. Like, you think I can't get around this? Like, I'm not the admin on this. I don't own the tool, but you think that I can't get around this? And then I immediately started discovering ways of getting around it. And when he didn't believe me, I showed him right there. I was like, well, I just did it. Like it's on my phone now. It's on my personal cell phone now. Like, what are we doing? And it's a different mentality that security people have, because I feel like when you tell us that we can't do something, we immediately make sure that we can't.
Well, it's funny. Listen, as comprehensive as our product is today, and the thing about traditional DLP is it doesn't see. There's so much it doesn't see. And the way we talk about it is traditional DLP. You write specific rules to cover things that you want to cover, and so as long as you know what all the risks are, you'll be fine. Of course, you don't know all the different ways that people can exfiltrate data and move data around, and so they tend not to be very effective solutions. In fact, when we sell today, 85% of our customers have a greenfield, meaning they don't have anything because people gave up on DLP 15 years ago. They said these systems don't work. They keep us from collaborating, etc. And so, what the space we call the space inside risk management today, Microsoft calls the same thing. So the idea is really like, hey, we will block people from doing things, but only in rare circumstances. What we mostly focus on is monitoring and then storing things into the cloud, so we can see where did the data come from, who had it, where did it go, what do we know about that person? Is this the first time they've used it? We can do all that kind of analysis in the cloud and do it efficiently, so we don't slow people's endpoints down, and then we can score, and then we can tell security, well, hey, you need to pay attention to Joe. And in particular, when Joe is leaving the company, this is the biggest risk you have. We can look back 90 days and say, hey, Joe, 40 days ago, you took a lot of information. And in this, one of the things we talked about is in the same way that you're very careful to make sure that we get our badge back so they can't physically get into the building. We're very careful to make sure we get the laptop back, right, so they can't get on our network. But only 10% of companies ask people about their data. Only 10% can ask you on the way out, hey, did you take the data? And so one of the things that we have as a process then say, go back to look at every single person who's departing the company and just double check that they haven't taken all their data. Because if you figure that out while they're in the process of leaving or before they've left, it's really easy to get it back at that point. And I know that sounds like, well, how is it? The security people, you'll never get that data back. They'll keep it someplace. I'm like, look, here's how you get it back. You basically tell them, look, we need to get it back. You need to give us all copies, and we need to be confident that you're doing that. Because if we're not confident you're doing that, you're going to sign an attestation that you did that. But tell us a little bit about the process. We're going to notify your next employer that you're in possession of our data. If we notify your next employer that you're in possession of our data, that actually puts them on the hook legally for it. But it also sends a pretty strong message to them that, hey, you're hiring a new person, and a new person who's never worked a day at your company is in the process of stealing the data from their last company. Do you really want to hire that person? So what most people come to understand very quickly is that they're putting their next job at risk if they don't return the data. And unlike when Anthony Lewandowski left, they didn't discover it for a year. By that time, they had taken all that data and they were using it. All that information was being used across Uber in this case. And so unwinding that was really complicated. If they had found that the 2 days before he had left and figured that out, it would have been a completely different situation. He probably would have never spent any time in prison. And then you would have taken his mind, which he's allowed to take, and his ideas, and worked at the next company and, maybe created some of that information and done some different things. But he wouldn't have sold his actual designs, source code, to property, etc.
With the evolution of AI and LLMs, are you seeing this as a new, I guess, attack avenue or attack path for insider threat? Because, I'm thinking about it from the, just a simple chatgpt side of it. Most of the time the company isn't going to block chatgpt. You could just upload whatever you want to chatgpt. And, you don't really know what they're doing with that data on the back end. So that's obviously a huge risk. But at the same time, you could save that conversation and then you can go and access it from your personal computer. Are you seeing, newer attack paths that you haven't seen before come up?
Yeah. And let's talk about sort of, how how that comes about. So the first thing to remember is most of the people that are moving data out of the company that put them into a large language model like ChatGPT, they're employees. And what are they doing? They're just trying to do their jobs. Like they're literally trying to do their jobs. They're probably not thinking, I'm exfiltrating the data. They're not putting it up into ChatGPT so that they can steal it in that case. They're just like, hey, maybe I can get a better answer to this or something. So one, that whole video education part that we talked about is super important, right? So just remember, why are they doing what they're doing? And can we educate them and then say, help them not do that. That'll solve most of the problems. They think, it was just trying to do their job. They weren't actually trying to, in most cases, steal data. They're certainly not trying to steal data and stick it in ChatGPT. How would that benefit them? I think what's really been interesting is that it's the first security. So about 7 months ago, when the supply chain attacks started happening, some of the board members would ask the security team, hey, how are we on our supply chains and what's going on there? But nothing has been quite as loud as the boards of directors specifically asking security leaders, are we covered for AI? Like, are people loading our data up into ChatGPT? It's one of those things that's been pressed so much that board members who aren't very technical usually and aren't very security savvy, but boy, are they worried about this issue? Because the hype cycle is really high, and so they're freaked out. So security people are hearing a lot of like, are we covered for that? So on the one hand, it's one of those times on security to be like, hey, you need to invest some more money and so we get some resources because the board really cares about this. But the actual threat, again, is relatively easily mitigated and controlled by controlling what, from a network security standpoint, what you get access to. Like our company, we have our own internal chat GPT, which only looks at our data. And so it's easy we restrict corporate access to chat GPT. And as I mentioned earlier, we also watch, for large file uploads as well. And I think that's an area that's we've got to pay more attention to. Now, one last example, sort of to your point, our CTO did a experiment, and he just asked ChatGPT to go tell us what the product roadmap plan is for our competitor and for our competitors. And ChatGPT came back with all of their stuff. So somebody over there had uploaded enough information. I guess they were working on their product plan and wanted help in creating it. And we got the entire product plan just by asking ChatGPT. So yes, the threat is real. It is usually accidental. So you gotta handle it knowing that it's usually accidental. And boards of directors are paying a lot of attention to it right now. So it's something you really need to pay attention to. Even though I would say the bigger threat to most organizations right now is source code exfiltration from your own software engineers, because when you think about like, hey, a hacker got in and install our source code. That's bad because they can look for vulnerabilities in your source code. But a hacker is had a hard time taking that source code and making a product. The person that wrote that source code and knows exactly what it does and how it's written and what business problem it's solving because they wrote it, that's the biggest risk to your source code today. And keeping those people in line and in check from doing that is a much bigger risk today. And I think you'll start probably hear a little bit more about this in the coming months because there's a few big cases that are happening out there today. Is probably a bigger risk than what's happening on the AI side.
Wow, that product roadmap, that is, I mean, the person that probably uploaded it, right, was just trying to get ChatGPT to write it better. I mean, I do that with everything. I mean, I know people that do that with all their emails to executives, right? It's
very valid idea. And again, you're not malicious. So you think about it, you're not trying to hurt the company when you do that, right?
Right.
So because of that, it's one of those things that can be largely solved through education. But you have to take it on. You have to address them. And then you see people doing things they're not supposed to. So most of us, all of us go through training, you know, at our companies. The company every year we have to do these mandatory trainings, and none of us pay any attention to it. We all push 2x on the video thing, and you know, that's how we do it. What really we found was really impactful is what the moment you do something wrong, within a few hours, that's when we send a video, it has an impact because you go, oh, I did do something wrong. I did upload something to ChatGPT. I shouldn't have done that. And they noticed. And so you combine those things. That's what's really important. So I would say that on right now, inside a threat in AI is an education problem. And then a course correction problem. Because a lot of people will still be like, look, I know I'm not supposed to do it, but I'm writing an email to my CEO. It needs to be really good. And so I'm going to put it in there and ask for, you know, better language and da, da, da. Well, if you know you're going to get caught doing that, then you're less likely to do that. But if you don't think anybody's paying attention, then you're going to continue to do that. So I think it's that, of course, the education is important, but also the enforcement of that education. But that's different than just hitting someone with a study term, you know?
Yeah, you're playing more into the psychology, right? It's more of the psychology of the person. How do we change that thought process? How do we change how they view this or whatnot, right? Which is, it's the better approach than the sledgehammer that I would have done.
And Joe, you pointed this out. It's so different than most cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's completely opposite.
Hey, we should talk to Fancy Bear and tell them that what they're doing is not a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, there's nobody at CrowdStrike that's sitting around and worried about, you know, like educating. You know, one of the other things that we always get raised eyebrows from security people is we say, look, in security, we don't want anybody to know our methods and practices, right? We don't want anybody to know that stuff. Except inside risk in companies. We actually want to tell people we're monitoring you, how we're monitoring you. We care about your, you know, we're not monitoring your productivity. We're just monitoring when you move data to untrusted location. You know, like we want you to know that we pay attention to that. And the first time you tell security people that, they're like, you don't want to tell people that. We're like, no, you do. You're not really want to catch them. But the rest of security is we want to track stuff. And it's not like, you know, we just don't want them to do it, is what it comes down to. And, you know, it's a wasted breath to try to educate the hackers of the world and you know, crime syndicates who are really running these things today. It's a waste of time. And we see it when they hack hospitals and they're literally causing people life and death problems, and they don't care. You know, and so clearly, you know, we're wasting our breath when we try to educate the bad folks.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, recently, and I'm not sure if it was in the news or anything like that. I don't watch the news, but you know, Lurie's Children's Memorial was attacked. And, you know, and it wasn't like a small attack. Like they took them offline. You know, and this is a children's hospital that treats only the sickest of sick kids, that doesn't even charge families if they can't afford the treatments. They don't even charge them. You know, I had a very personal experience with that, right? Like my sister was a patient there, and there was no way my family would ever be able to, you know, shell out the $500,000 to get her, you know, treated for the next 3 years or whatever it was, you know? And they didn't send us a bill or anything like that. You know, like that was a huge weight lifted off of us. And now these attackers, you know, they go in and they knock them offline. It's like, guys, you know, at least do an adult hospital. You know what I'm saying? Like a children's hospital is just like the most heartless thing that you can do. But these attackers, they don't care.
They don't. And again, very different than your insiders. And your insiders do care. They work at your companies, and they, for the most part, I mean, there's a few people doing, you know, real espionage at organizations. And when I was at our clients, I was like, yeah, we're going to help you find those too. But like the most important thing is to help you reduce the amount of events you see that are non-threatening, that are accidental, that just require a little bit of course correction so you can spend your time focused on the others. A friend of mine told me this on one of my first jobs in my early 20s, because I was the manager of a small retail store. And I mean, small, like 7 people work, really small. And somebody was taken from the till. And this was before all payments were credit cards, and back then we took cash, right? And my owner, the boss, said, "Look, Joe, 10% of the people will never steal from you. And 10% of people will always steal from you. And 80% of the people will steal from you if you give them the opportunity. So your job is to set up the systems and the processes and the controls so that 80% doesn't steal from you. And you can focus and figure out who the 10% that will always steal from you is." And that's sort of a retailer mantra. Like, retailers have known this forever. If you ask a retailer, where is most of your leakage from? And it's not from people coming in. Well, at some cities, and mostly not people coming from the outside, and so it's your own employees taking it. And I think the information services businesses and professional services business have been sort of slow to realize that. I tell that story often now because what we try to really help our clients do is get that 80% figured out, so that they're trying to spend with the 10% that are going to take from you no matter what. And catching them is really important, because they probably have malicious intent with what they're going to do with the data.
Well, Joe, unfortunately we're at the top of the hour here. We're at the end of our time. I feel like we keep talking about this forever.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can reach out to you if they wanted to reach out, and where they can find your company.
Yeah, so we're Code42, and that's code42.com. And you can get me at Payne Joe on that sickness. And you can get me at joe.payne, Payne, at code42.com. And happy to talk to any of you. And, we try to get back to the community. So we've got a big research report coming out, I think, in a few days, called the Data Exposure Report. We do it every year, so look for that. And there's lots of information there about insider threat and insider risk.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.